Good evening, students, faculty, parents, alumni trustees, members of the Astrological Society of Greenwich and the Westchester Amateurs Astronomers, special visitors from IBM, and distinguished guests. My name is Anissa Erical, and I'm a senior here at Sacred Heart Greenwich. I'm honored to be with you all here tonight to celebrate this momentous occasion on campus. I'd like to take a moment to thank our partners at IBM and NASA for making all of today's events possible, and especially Dr. Whitson for sharing her highlights of her amazing career with our entire school this morning. Tonight's panelists will provide insights on the unfulfilled potential of keeping girls in the STEAM fields beyond secondary school. STEAM, an acronym we hear tossed around quite a bit, stands and encompasses science, technology, engineering, art, and math. As I mentioned, I've been lucky enough to attend Sacred Heart, which has taught me to, no pun intended, reach for the stars. Okay, a little bit of pun intended, but nevertheless, it is true. For myself, I've been encouraged at Sacred Heart to pursue any opportunity without certain fields or interests feeling stigmatized. I began exploring computer science in 9th grade and quickly found a passion and interest for coding and the opportunities that lay in STEAM for me. Computer science has given me the ability to create beyond human extent, and technology allows us to take humanity in our world, and in some cases even other worlds, to new levels. This fascination and passion has come to drive my academic life, and likewise for many others around the world. Yet still, as of 2016, only 7% of women graduate with a STEM degree. Why is it that females tend to shy away from the sciences as their years in schooling continue? With women underrepresented in the field, it takes a conscious effort to find extraordinary female role models in STEAM. Each of these panelists can add another point of reference in a young girl's mind about the possibilities that lie in STEAM. With more female representation and less stigmatization around STEAM, nothing is off limits, not even the sky. It is my honor to introduce the moderator for this evening's discussion, Ms. Nancy Greco. She's been an engineer for IBM for 35 years. She started working by developing chemical compounds for IBM's semiconductor processing, had many different engineering roles, and is currently an engineering executive, working in research and developing Internet of Things technology to harvest data from sensory devices. She leads a team of global developing acoustic machine learning models to recognize sounds of machines, cars, homes, and other systems. They have the ability to alert humans of a machine's failure or additional problems. In the very near future, your machine, car, or home will be able to send you a text or call with the mechanical problem it's developing and the actions that need to be taken. She holds 21 patents, 2 bachelors of science in chemistry and technical communications from Cornell and SUNY. She's been an active member in numerous STEAM initiatives and studies, many targeted to understand how girls and women can continue to be in the STEAM career pipeline. Without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Nancy Greco to begin our star-studded conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And as we said, we're announcing a partnership tonight between IBM, NASA, and Sacred Heart Greenwich because we will move the needle in STEAM for the female population. Now, to do any type of partnership, you really need a strong support team. And I just want to take a minute to recognize a couple of women that none of us would be here tonight if we didn't have some tremendous help. So Emily, Barry, would you please stand up? Melissa and Haley, we wouldn't be here tonight without these extraordinary women. So I have an incredible panel here tonight, and I'm going to open it up and have a few questions that they will answer, and then later we'll turn it over to the audience. So let me begin. As you heard, I have had the opportunity to create technology for the past 35 years, but the woman sitting next to me has had just an extraordinary life experiencing the technology. Can you imagine if your entire life depended on the technology you were in? And it doesn't mean a cell phone either, as my daughter would say. But it took you to places you couldn't even imagine some of us going. Dr. Peggy Whitson has had such an extraordinary career. She has 3 Guinness World Records. for most time spent in space. She's had 10 spacewalks, etc. So we're going to have an opportunity to talk to her about the space program, what do we learn from it, and have her share her experiences relying on technology that literally kept her alive. The next person we have is Dr. Tess Caswell. She's an engineer and planetary scientist. She recently completed a 30-day simulated Earth-bound habitat to study the effects of the mind and body in space. She is currently a member of the Blue Origin team, and we'll get to talk to her about the work she's doing. Dan Barstone is a senior educator manager for the International Space Station. He's coming here joining us from NASA as well. He leads the Space Station Explorer program that offers online free curriculum to every child everywhere. So a very strong partnership there. I also like to introduce Dr. Zach Limnois. I used to work for Zach, so I know the caliber of person that is sitting up on this stage with me. He's the Vice President of IBM at Research, Yorktown, New York, and he is a subject matter expert across many, many industries. If you want to know what's going to happen in the future in technology, Zach is the person you're going to want to talk to. And on the end, we have Mary Mussolini, the Director of Sacred Heart and Science Research Program. She has been sitting at the board of Connecticut STEM for over 10 years, and she's going to be sharing with us how important it is to bring research into the schools and not wait to come into colleges and into the careers. I just found it so fascinating that a school would have a research direction in their midst and help to drive those programs. So let me start with a couple of questions first. So Peggy, what an extraordinary life and career. But what we've been hearing, it wasn't all that easy. Can you tell us about the challenges of space, travel, including applying 5 times before you got accepted as an astronaut? And then really with that challenge, with the risk and some of the disappointments, can you share what kept you going?
Well, it took 5 application cycles before I was ever invited for an interview. And so that was over 10 years. And it's hard to maybe maintain motivation over those 10 years. But I was working at NASA. I've always said I've never had a real job because I've always done what I wanted, which is to be a part of exploration and work at NASA. So as soon as I finished my PhD thesis, I got a postdoctoral fellowship at NASA. Then I worked as a contractor for 1.5 years, and then was hired by NASA. So, but those 10 years leading up to the actually becoming finally selected as an astronaut turned out to be, in retrospect, something that made me a much better astronaut, and I think trained me to be able to be a commander on the space station, trained me, gave me the skill set and the negotiating capabilities and all the things that I needed to be the first female chief of the astronaut office. And I think those 10 years of rejection I can look back on and say they were, you know, the 10 years that built me. So I think you have to enjoy the journey and recognize that it may not seem like it's going your way, but if you can still take everything that you can get from your journey, it'll give you something in the end.
Thank you, but you were one of the few women. Did it bother you that you might have been on the team one of the few women there? And maybe did you feel you never fit in?
I was probably too stubborn or to recognize that was an acceptable solution. But when I first started working at NASA, I was in many meetings where I was the only female in the room. And NASA was pretty progressive in terms of hiring and equal opportunity and all that. But I still was in many meetings where I was the only woman. And I got used to it. And it's okay to be in that situation, and you don't have to stress too much about it. You just have to prove you can do the job. And so I try and tell young people, especially young people these days are, I think, much more socially aware, and they ask a lot of questions about, what do I do if someone, tries to discriminate? I'm like, it doesn't matter. Just do your job, prove you can do it, keep going, don't stop, and prove them wrong.
Excellent advice. So Tess, reading your blog, it really comes out that you have a tremendous love for science. So I'm going to ask you to describe the Hera project, and then I'm going to also put you on the spot about what's the value of doing research in space? Why can't we do it here at home?
Oh, man. Well, so first I'll speak to the Hera project. Hera stands for Human Exploration Research Analog, and the analog part is that it's a simulated spacecraft. It's in a hangar at Johnson Space Center in Houston, and crews of astronaut-like volunteers live inside of this habitat right now for up to 45 days at a time. I lived in it for a month with 3 men. So talk about being the only woman in the room. For an entire month, I was the only woman in space. But to speak to that, what I learned was that it didn't really matter. We were all there on a common mission, which was to learn about the effects of stress and isolation on a crew of astronauts isolated from the Earth. And we were living the astronaut life. We knew we were there for a good cause. We united around the fact that we were happy and we were contributing to the human exploration of space. And I worried about being the only woman before, but as soon as I met the crew and we went into the habitat, I never worried about it again for the rest of the mission, because we were on a mission together. We had a purpose, and it didn't really matter if you were male or female. It was the purpose. Hera was a lot of fun. We lived the astronaut life. We tried to have as close to the life that Peggy had on the space station as possible. So we followed a schedule every morning. We woke up and looked at our tablets and had a plan for the day for mission control, and we had to follow it. We were isolated from Earth, so we had no internet, no Netflix, nothing like that, no Facebook, but we somehow survived. And while we were in there, 21 teams of researchers were studying how we behaved, how we interacted as a crew, and attempted to understand how that kind of isolation from Earth affects someone on a psychological level. I would say that we were more stressed out in Hera than a real astronaut would be, and I think that's because they wanted to see what kind of tension might arise inside of the habitat over that period of time. But the intent was to figure out how things could go wrong and figure out how we might find solutions to those things without having to disrupt the life of astronauts on board the space station to learn the same lessons. So we learned a lot. The investigators are still publishing papers on the data collected during the Hera missions. And we were the third of 4 missions, so several other people lived in this habitat in addition to us. And I think that the study was specifically to understand stress and isolation on astronauts, but the results are broadly applicable, right? Stress is not something foreign to anyone in this room. If you are a person to whom stress is foreign, I envy you greatly. And even in this world where we all have Facebook or other social network technology in our pockets, isolation is something that's not unique to anyone either. And so I think that learning how to recognize and prevent isolation, feelings of isolation and stress, is broadly applicable beyond Hera. So to speak to why we explore space, I can look at it from a couple of different angles. So as a planetary scientist, I've looked at Mars. I've looked at moons of the outer solar system that are entirely covered in ice. And when you look at pictures of Mars from the rovers, it looks like a dead world, right? It's just dust and rocks. But from a geological perspective, when you look at those rocks, it tells you that billions of years ago, Mars was an incredibly dynamic planet, that it had lakes, it may have had oceans, it had rivers, it had an environment perhaps similar to Earth. So by looking at Mars, we can discern how Mars is different, how it ended up different from the Earth, try to understand why, and in so doing, better understand the planet that we live on. And you could say the same for Venus, which has the opposite problem of Mars, right? It has a thick, crushing atmosphere of acid and a temperature that could melt lead at the surface. How did Venus end up like that, where we have this beautiful paradise that we live upon? So comparative planetology teaches us a lot about the world that we live on. If you look beyond the rocky planets, you go out to Jupiter, you go out to Saturn, there are these moons so far from the sun that their surfaces are entirely encased in ice. And you would think that that would be the most inhospitable place in the solar system. But what we learned from some of the spacecraft that we sent out there was that underneath that ice are oceans. And those oceans are in contact with a seafloor. Just like here on Earth, we have mid-ocean ridges and you have vents that have tube worms and things living around them. So it's possible that we've found some of the other places in the solar system where life could arise just by sending a probe out there and taking some pictures. So by sending a tiny probe out in the outer solar system, we may have helped understand the genesis of life in the solar system. These are the places where the ingredients for life are present. So if we can understand whether or not life is there, we understand better how perhaps we got here. So I think there are all kinds of scientific and technical benefits to space exploration.
Okay, Zach, there's probably not a week that goes by that I don't see a tweet out there that says robots are going to take all our jobs, right? They're taking over, AI is taking over. But if we look at it, IBM does a lot of investment in making sure skills are out there. The whole panel, we're making sure we have skills for STEM. So my question to you, are the tweets correct, or is there going to be a demand for STEM careers?
Well, there's a huge demand. So let me talk to the students for just a minute. And I'll break the code book for you. So we got the questions ahead of time so we could think about them. And as I've thought about that question, I'll ask you to think about what did the world look like in terms of technology 20 years ago? Or maybe even 10 years ago? There was actually a time not too long ago when you wanted to make a phone call, you had to go to a specific room in your house to talk to somebody else that happened to be in a specific room in their house, and you hoped your parents weren't around because you wanted to have a private conversation. This was in my high school years. And today it's very different. I mean, we all carry cell phones, we all have access to technology. We don't even think about it. We don't even think about it. It's there for us to use, and it's there for us to help change our lives. And the question about AI and how is that going to evolve, we're in the very early stages of that. It's very clear. And I would say to the students here, and you'll hear it through the day, you'll hear it through the evening, that science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, those all have key meanings. And as Peggy said, you've got to find your passion. You've got to find the place that really makes it exciting for you. And as Tess showed us, passion for exploration, passion for research, those things come together. They really do. And if I think about sort of my journey in engineering, the world has changed many, many times. I'm not that old, but the world has changed a few times over. And the things that we all have access to today, I can only imagine what we'll have access to 10 or 15 years from now when most of you as students are in the job field. And so I'm not going to tell you, well, this field or that field. I will tell you that excel in those disciplines, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math, and you're in a pretty good path. You're in a pretty good path. It may not turn out exactly the way you think it's going to go, but I will guarantee that's a solid path. We've seen it, and I can only imagine sort of how this is going to evolve. AI is an amazing piece, but I would tell you we're in the early innings of that. We're just exploring now how we're going to apply AI in different disciplines. And it's far more interesting than Siri. It's far more interesting than autonomous cars. It's going to change industries, and you're starting to see it. And boy, if I was a student today, I'd be grabbing that, and I'd be saying, that's where I want to go. Wherever, whether it's engineering rich or arts rich, because those disciplines, they're really not as stovepiped as we try to make them out to be. There really are intersections. We need creative engineers, we need deep researchers, but we also need artists and people that are in the soft sciences to help us understand how do we actually use those technologies in a way that matters, the way that people can actually understand them and actually help people in the spaces that they're in. So kind of a long question a long answer to a question that I got a few days ago, and just to give you some thoughts on it.
Thank you, Zach. So what we have here, passion for STEM, and I agree with Zach because I get to see it too. There's a big demand coming for careers in STEM. So encourage your students, encourage your daughters, encourage your sons. So another question is, well, maybe it's a very specific curriculum. Is there different types of programs out there that maybe can give me a different perspective? So Dan, you run a Space Explorer curriculum. Would you mind describing that for us?
Sure. As you mentioned, I'm the education manager for the International Space Station. I don't know how much you know about the space station. It's in orbit every 92 minutes, has a crew, currently 3, typically 6 astronauts. It's about the size of a football field, and it's full of science labs. All kinds of experiments taking place there. Well, we've spoken already here about how you should think of the future when you can be like a Peggy or a Tess and do some of these amazing things. But I'd like to talk about the present and why we're initiating a program with Sacred Heart. We now have the ability for the students here today, this year, to design, build, and launch your own experiments to the space station, to operate experiments that do Earth photography or thermodynamics or robotics on the space station, not in some far future, but for you to do it now. We will, over the next year, work with the students and the faculty here, and you especially, to help you understand how you might do this. But we've had students at your sister school, the Duchesne Academy in Houston, did an experiment about plants and lights and how they could be different spectra, how they would operate in space. We launched that up there. We've had students study climate change by directing a camera on the space station. Students who've done robotics, sending program code up to the space station. So the revolution that's taken place from the education side is that instead of learning about space, you participate in it. And over the next year and beyond, we'll work with you to make that happen.
Thank you. So Mary, you run a research programs here in school. Could you describe what that does in addition to learning how to do math and science, et cetera? Is getting that experience as a researcher and that creativity, how do you do it and how important is that?
Right. I think it's very important, especially when you're working with young people and the enthusiasm that exists there and the outside of the box thinking and the great things that can come from it. I mean, I have countless research projects that I could quote in terms of just the great things that the students have done, and they're taking ownership. This is their project, and there's just a lot of excitement. I can tell you when I think about the excitement of my students, I think about the freshmen that I have this year. This is the first year that we've opened up the research program to freshmen, and their excitement is just unbelievable. For example, early in the year, we were meeting in a classroom, and I wanted to show them the research room. So I told them we were going on a field trip, and they started cheering, jumping up and down and cheering. And I said, we're only going down the hall. But they were just enthusiastic to just, and to this day they still are, just learning. They're forming their research projects and questions, and they come to class with interests and passion. And just to watch it grow over the years is great, and I could just give you a few examples. One example is a former student who Dr. Coswell knows, Christina Chardulo, and she came to class very passionate about environmental issues, and she learned that wastewater treatment facilities often let hydrogen sulfide out into the atmosphere, so she wanted to do something about it. So she got to work developing a hydrogen sulfide biofilter, and she said she was going to go to the Stamford wastewater treatment facility and propose that they put her filter onto their equipment so that she could test the effectiveness of it. So I thought this is going to be a great experience. Even when they say no, she will have, gone through so much to learning to get there. So she did not think no was going to happen. So she presented very expertly her proposal, and much to my surprise, they said yes, because they were making changes anyway in their system. So they allowed her to install her biofilter. She attended daily and collected readings, and she presented at several conferences and fairs. And I remember at the state fair, she won quite a bit of prize money. And after the ceremony, I saw her on the phone, and I said, "Oh, are you telling your parents?" And she said, "No, I'm booking a trip to Disney with the prize money." Another outside-of-the-box thinking group, some of the members are here right now. I call them my Shark Girls. Shout out to them. And they are really interested in shark research, and we've pretty much done all we could do in our lab. There's one vital component missing, and that's sharks. So they located a shark lab in Bimini, of all places, and they contacted the researchers there, and the researchers said, "You know what? Put together a proposal, send it to us, and we'll look at it." So they worked very hard putting together a proposal of their experimentation, what they wanted to accomplish, the itinerary, the dates, and sent it to them. And we waited. And, I figured we would get a no again. And the girls said, "Oh, they're reviewing it in detail. That's why it's taking so long." So sure enough, they came back with a yes. They really wanted the girls to come and do research. So that's where we may be in February. And the excitement, again, from students generating their own ideas, their own research, their experimental design, and submitting it, and seeing that there are researchers who are interested is a really great experience. And I think it's not only in the research program. I think that all of the science faculty here at the school really help students plant that seed for future growth and passion, and just very proud of the department we have here and the school's support of the sciences.
Very good. One thing, as I mentioned, we've been studying this pipeline for the past 20 years, and we have incredibly progressive programs. We have great role models, a lot of curriculum. But if you actually look at the numbers, we've not been progressing that much. It's really hard to find a corporation that is exceeding 30% number of women in STEM. So I wanted to ask the panel, and I'll open it up to you. What's going wrong? I mean, we've got the curriculum. The girls certainly are capable of doing it. We have the role models, et cetera. Is there some kind of image problem associated with a scientific woman? And I'll just confess, when I was in high school, I really did look like Amy Farrah Fowler in The Big Bang. And so it would be hard to say, be like her. But hopefully, is social media playing into this? Do you think there's an image problem? And how could we turn it around? And I'll ask anyone in the panel to grab that one.
I think social media absolutely helps, because you can see role models. I follow Peggy on Twitter, and I'm inspired by her every day. But there are many, many such role models out there, and you can find them and you can get their advice via the medium of social media. And that's a wonderful thing. But I think that really getting out there and talking to the future women of STEM or STEAM is crucial, because even seeing something online, I think there's still a separation there. It's still easy to say, well, that's not me because X, Y, Z. When in reality, when you talk to a person in STEAM, you realize, actually, your paths may be very similar. And so I think one of my goals is to go out into the community as often as possible and to talk to future scientists, engineers, mathematicians, and artists, because that's how we make the connections that lead you on into the field. And that's because that's how it worked for me. for me, it was a guy from NASA coming to my school, but making that personal connection really just lit the fire of my passion for space exploration, and I think paying that forward is incredibly important.
I'd like to add a word of praise for Sacred Heart. I know you said you studied the pipeline, there still are issues, but I just have to say, I've been here all day, I am so impressed. The girls that asked questions today of Peggy were knowledge-based questions. They weren't simply, what's it like in space, asked over and over again. They asked about what was it like when you saw the eclipse, you know, they knew what they were talking about. So I think, also there was a sense of poise and confidence and not sort of timidity. There was just a sense that you are leaders, you will be leaders, and just a confidence in that future. And so I just want to say that what Sacred Heart is doing is really incredible. So that's a key piece of it. And that's why we decided to do some stuff here. So good for you.
Yeah.
But I wanted to add one other interesting fact, that currently on the space station, there's one American astronaut, a woman. So our entire astronaut corps on the space station of Americans is female. That's a good thing. So we're making progress.
And there's another female luncheon in December.
Yeah,
So, yeah. So we'll have 2
good.
U.S. women up there.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then anyone from the audience, I think we're going to have microphones on either side. So one trend we've also seen, too, as we look at the statistics, women and girls will develop more self-doubt, more than their male counterparts. So we're trying to say, yes, you have the passion, you have the curiosity, but what can a parent or teacher say to a child, a girl that's like, I don't know, you know, I have the self-doubt, et cetera. Would you have any advice? Is there soft skills we should be developing to say, yeah, you're going to be in a male environment, you both were, and, you know, what could they do? What can a mom and dad do to say it's okay to doubt yourself, but what advice would we have?
Well, I would call myself a person of a lot of self-doubts. I always question whether I'm good enough, but I think the thing that has enabled me to be so successful is continually challenging myself to do more than what I think I can do. So I might be asked to do a job, and I'm like, well, I'm not really sure I can do that, but let me try. And every time you say yes, you get more experience. You may not always be successful, but you get more experience, you learn more, you learn how to deal with failures, you learn how to work around failures, you learn these things that are going to make you even more successful. So I guess from a parent's perspective, I would say challenge your children to do more than what's easy for them to do. Challenge them to do the things that are maybe a little bit hard for them to accept that they can do, so they get used to the fact that it is okay to go out there and try something new, to push on an edge where maybe I'm not sure I can do that. So giving them that challenge, encourage that challenge, self-challenge.
And I'd like to say how wonderful that you have self-doubt. If we are arrogant and think we have all the right answers, it's a disaster. So the challenge is not the self-doubt. It's that you have to accept that, embrace it, and move forward. That I make mistakes every day. Is this the right thing to do? Here we are at Sacred Heart. You know, we've had conversations. Is this the right place? Well, sure. So let's do it. And so it's to embrace the self-doubt for the insights that it provides, that you are not perfect, don't have all the answers, but to move forward within that.
So the key advice is it's okay to have self-doubt, push yourself, and this is what the parents can do to reinforce that. And I think even sharing that, I can't believe you had self-doubt, Peggy. I mean, goodness.
I still do.
See?
There's always going to be
With
that
all
in me.
what you've accomplished. Any other comments, people?
Yeah, Nancy, let me just add to that a little bit. My experience not just in women engineers, but across the field, mentorships are so important. And whether those mentorships come from parents or teachers or a colleague, having somebody that you can talk to that kind of stretches you, pushes you a little bit further, maybe guides you, maybe gives you the advice, so critical. I've seen that here in the teachers. It's actually a really unique aspect of the school is the teachers are here not just to provide information, but they're also here to mentor you. And there's a strong sense of mentoring between a teacher and a student. When that happens, it's magic. I'll tell you that you've seen it in our stories, you'll see it at some point in the job market, that this field, engineering, science, technology, this general field, is a contact sport. It is not clean. Things don't happen the way you want them to happen sometimes. You need to have a colleague with you or somebody with you. You can kind of say, look, this isn't going the way I think it is, but I think I have the right idea. And I'll tell you, my experience is that ideas matter a lot. You know, so the idea usually trumps somebody that's trying to move in a direction that might not be the right direction. At the end of the day, truth really trumps, and it does matter a lot. So, you know, I would encourage you to follow the model that you have here. Parents, mentoring your students at home through the avenues that exist here. The relationship that IBM has with this school isn't just one of convenience. It's one that we're trying to bring, you know, some remarkable women mentors into the school to help guide and provide some examples for the young women that are here. That's a powerful message. It really is, and it goes a long way. It goes a long way because the field really isn't as clean as, you know, the problems that we work on, the sorts of challenges that we're all trying to address, generally they don't have simple solutions. It'd be nice if they did, but they really don't. So having a colleague side by side is really important.
Great, thanks, Zach. So let's turn it into the room here. Do we have any questions for this panel? Right here in front.
The American language, is that what you asked? Oh, sign language. Actually, we have had one astronaut on board who knew American Sign Language, and she actually did an event with a deaf school while she was on board. Tracy Caldwell was the astronaut, and she's the first person who did an event using American Sign Language from the International Space Station. The really cool thing about the research on the International Space Station is it's so diverse. There's so many different things that we can do. We do experiments where we're burning samples, which is kind of cool, but it obviously has to be inside a very controlled chamber. We do experiments where we're looking at colloidal solutions and electromagnetic fields. We do experiments where we're growing cells. So we look at like how ants handle being in space, or fish, you know, they swim around in circles. And, you know, just do all kinds of different biological, physical science, engineering experiments, all on board the space station. It's an incredible diverse set of things we do.
How fast is the fastest ship that you have gone in outer space?
17,500 miles an hour.
Ooh.
It's pretty cool.
As a girl who wants to pursue a career in a field of engineering, are there any steps that I can take now in high school that can give me an advantage in the future?
I'd say pick your passion and follow it. If you want to study engineering, math is going to be very important in your life. Physics will be very important in your life, but also the things that you would apply engineering to. You know, what are your interests? If you're into astronomy, there's a whole field of electrical engineering that is crucial to obtaining good images from a telescope. So cultivate not just the science and the math, but cultivate your other interests as well, because someday there'll be that intersection between the practice of engineering and the application that you're passionate about.
I would add to that, start watching technology feeds. And if you don't know what technology feed to look at, find someone who really follows that. I have two folks at work that mentor me. One is 1/3 my age. He comes into my office telling me what the new app is, what the new device is, et cetera. He's always telling me, you got to go check this out, Nancy. Take a look at that. So I get a glimpse of what the future is. The other one is very into AI. He comes and says, go look at Google Duplex, go look at this. So they start to tell you what's happening now, and you can begin to see what's going to be happening in the future. So that's a really good source to see how are the skills changing? What courses or knowledge do I need to know to keep up?
Here's an interesting other piece of the story. You've talked about STEAM. Elon Musk runs the SpaceX company, and he found somebody who wanted to pay for a flight around the moon. In fact, this person didn't just pay for one flight, paid for a half a dozen seats. That he got to choose who would be the other people who would fly with him. So he said he wants artists, poets, painters, photographers, musicians, who can express what they see in some wonderful, evocative, creative ways. So the irony is, while we're pushing STEM, the ones who get to fly next are the artists. So, it's a broad field out there.
Nancy, just to add on that, who was the girl that asked the question? Yeah, so you said you're a senior?
I'm a freshman.
You're a freshman. So when you're a senior, how to prepare? Yeah, so one thing, again, it's a little bit dated. Something I hated when I was a high school junior and senior, but it actually helped out a lot. My dad asked me to do book reports on scientific journals. These were things that I had no idea what this stuff was. I remember reading Science and Nature. I remember reading the IBM journal and looking at papers, not as a practitioner, but just wondering, what would that be like? So you might take a little bit of time and put yourself in a space where you're actually reading about research that's being done or work that's being done in that area, whether it's engineering or whether it's art or whether it's science or math. Taking a little bit of time and trying to connect, and some of those journals, some of those papers you might find really boring. Some of them you might really connect with. And it only takes a few, but you'll find that space that interests you. And when you do, things really start clicking.
And you could join the research program.
There you
Lots
go.
of journals.
Yeah, it's and again, I remember those book reports I did as a junior in high school. And to me, why am I doing this? And I look back now, and those were actually pretty important.
I would say another thing that ended up being pretty important for me was tinkering. So not just reading or doing math assignments, but working on my car in the garage with my dad, because that gives you a tangible sense for how these things actually function in the world. And it gives you an added perspective when you go to apply for engineering schools that you've actually worked with machines or circuits or what have you. So I also would totally encourage you to hang out in the makerspace and tinker with stuff too.
I would agree with that. Hands-on experience will jump out on your resume, and I think I
Absolutely.
would agree to that.
I talked to a PhD researcher. She said she wouldn't take grad students who had never tinkered in a lab before. So don't limit yourself.
What concerns aboard the space station did you have about radiation or any kind of health effect that might be permanent on your life?
Well, there are definitely a lot of potential effects of being in space, and that's one of the things that we're doing on the International Space Station, is trying to do the research to understand exactly what those effects are. One of the main things that you've probably heard about is the bone demineralization and the bone loss that occurs while we're in space. A grandmother maybe might, if she had osteoporosis, she might be losing 1% of her bone mass in a year. And we, on board the space station, if we don't do anything about it, would lose 1% of our bone mass a month. So it's pretty dramatic, but it gives us a great environment to test new drugs or to try and understand the biochemical mechanisms that are causing those changes, and that may lead to better drugs in the future for us here on Earth as well. So there's things like that that we are doing that are strictly to try and understand what the risks are to the human body to go into space. But all of those things, I think, are going to pay off down here on Earth as well, with the things that we learn from that research.
Back of the room.
After living in space for so long, how does your body change physically?
After living in space for so long, coming back home every time is traumatic for me. Some people get sick when they go up into space, and that usually lasts a few days. And some people get sick when they come home, and I'm one of the get sick on the downhill side. I feel nauseous. I have neurovestibular problems for the first few days, readapting to gravity. And it's something you just readjust to. Your body eventually remembers what gravity's like and that you got to stay. And so the first day I'm like, oh, just send me back. It's not any fun at first, but your body does eventually remember how.
Do you try to float up to get that cup?
After my first flight, I was laying in bed the first evening after I'd returned, and I decided I needed to go to the bathroom, and I went like this, thinking that was going to get me across the room. To realize it was going to take a lot more effort than that.
I was wondering, you're thinking of going to other planets, farther away, will take a lot, a few years. So what are you guys doing on improving the shelf life of space food?
Oh. So the shelf life of space food was actually something that we studied on our Hera mission. We ate meal replacement bars. They were almost literally the size of bricks, and there were 4 flavors. There was banana nut, orange cranberry, barbecue, and jalapeno nut. And these were breakfast food. And they were developed by a lab in Natick, actually, and with the NASA Food Lab to have all of the macro and micronutrition that an astronaut would need for an entire meal in one bar. And we were required to eat them every morning for breakfast for the first 2 weeks of our mission. And they were actually pretty good, although I would say that everyone had a preference, and we had a barter economy of food bars going on in our mission. My favorite was orange cranberry, but jalapeno nut was a close second.
I would go for jalapeno nut, I think.
Yeah. You could tell that they were developed in Texas. But they were good. But those are the sorts of studies that are going on right now in order to figure out how we can get as much food as possible into a spacecraft for such a long journey, because it's going to be a challenge.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that? I'm curious about, we do a lot of research on plants and using solar energy that then feeds into the lights for the plants, but the plants also use, from the atmosphere, water, require space. Are plants an efficient way to grow food over the long haul, or is it more efficient to have these, jalapeno nut bars?
Definitely, plants take up more space. I think there are a couple of advantages of growing plants, and they're both psychological. It's because it's more like real food, and some people actually enjoy growing them. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some benefits of growing plants, but they do, I think if you found the right plant, you might have to develop some miniaturized version of something that was very compact, that grew rapidly, produced a lot. You'd have to optimize the plant selection to minimize the space and the requirements. But remember, plants do take up that nasty carbon dioxide, and if you had enough plants around, that could help you reduce the requirement you need for carbon dioxide removal on board your spacecraft. So there's benefits too. It's just it's a little less tangible because you can't always be sure you're going to have enough plants to remove your CO2.
Okay.
What did it feel like to wake up in the morning and realize you weren't on the Earth? Like, was there something different with the gravity, and how did it feel out in space when you were floating around? And
Well, when you first get to space, it feels that way every morning you wake up. And I think what was really an interesting transition was about 3 weeks into the mission. I'd woke up in the morning. I was looking on the computer at the day's activities. I printed something off that was at the other end of the lab, and I'm floating through the lab, and I'm like, hey, I'm living in space. So I think the transition going from the, hey, this is different to, hey, this is home, this is where I work, that was kind of the interesting psychological transition was, this is natural, then you can adapt to this new, completely different environment.
What was the biggest struggle that could happen in space?
The biggest struggle for me was when we tore a solar array, and I was the commander on board the space station, and we had to come up with a plan to fix it. Of course, we had all the folks on the ground helping us figure out how to fix it, but it was a pretty a sporty fix, I would call the sportiest robotics we'd ever done, and it required a lot of creativity. It was, not quite a duct tape solution, but it was involved wiring a lot of tape. And so it was, I think, a really challenging time, but one of the most satisfying that I can look back on in retrospect because it was that challenging.
I think a cool thing to point out about that mission, too, was that Pam Melroy was the commander of that shuttle mission. It was the first time that women had been in command of the space station and the space shuttle simultaneously.
How do you foresee the future of sending people to space, and do you foresee the commercialization of space anytime in the near future?
I do see it as commercialization of space being something very exciting. I think for young people right now, the different options that are going to be out there are just expanding, and I predict it'll be exponentially in the next 10 to 20 years. It's just really going to surge, and I think it's going to be a really exciting time. There's going to be lots and lots of different options. It's interesting to me that for space flight, it requires so many different skill sets. So for my space mission, I have trainers that train me. I met a young woman whose degree was in fashion design, who was heat sealing the inner bladder of my spacesuit. So you have all these different skill sets. There were divers who helped with my training in the spacesuit, in the neutral buoyancy laboratory, a really big swimming pool. And so there's just this huge diverse group of people engineers like Tess, who worked on mission control in various different specialties. There are so many different jobs that NASA has, or even that the commercial programs are going to need just the same as NASA in the future. So I just see it as an exploding field, and get in early.
Ooh, the most surprisingly difficult simulation aspect. I was really worried that it was going to be being the only woman. Fortunately, that was not a problem. It turned out to be the little things. We had a lot of fun. We tackled a lot of challenges. We flew a little pod down to the surface of an asteroid and picked up rocks. And we simulated really pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. But when it came down to it, the hardest part for me was the tiny things that people do in a small space that get in your way. And they don't realize that they're doing it. And it takes an element of honesty with people that you maybe don't know super well to tackle those things before they become really big problems. For example, one of the people on my mission, he would leave his chair out in the middle of the room when we had, maybe as much space as is in front of us on this stage. And so when you went to cook dinner, you had to move his chair every time you went to the oven. And that seems like a small thing once or twice, but when it happens every day for 3 weeks in a row, suddenly I found myself thinking, oh, this chair every time. And you just have to be willing to say to the person, could you please push your chair in? And then they do, and it's all over, and it's fine. But that can be really challenging, to be that honest with a person that you're stuck in a small space with, because you have to get over that worry that they're going to be mad at you because you want them to push their chair in.
The girl with the red shirt.
What do I like? What do I like doing best in space? I like doing the spacewalks. That's probably the most fun, challenging part. And so it's really neat to be outside in your spacecraft that's built for one, and to be able to get some really complicated things completed. So that's probably the most satisfying part.
When do astronauts eat lunch in outer space?
Oh, can you say that again, please?
Did your sense
When
of...
do astronauts eat lunch in outer space?
How was lunch in space?
Lunch in space was good. It's interesting because you do have to learn how to eat in space. Most of our food is packaged in either plastic bags that you rehydrate with water, or what they call these military rations, so they're in foil pouches. So you just have to learn how to open them up so that you don't make a mess. And most of the food is liquid enough that it'll have surface tension and stick to itself. But if you get one of those dishes, like some of the rice pilaf stuff, it just goes everywhere. So you have to learn how to manage the food that you're eating, which takes a little skill. And then, of course, there's people who play with their food floating it around in space, too. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. Yes.
Did your sense of smell change in space? And if yes, how long did it last?
Your sense of smell, they think, is related in the autonomic nervous system. And I do think a little bit it changes. I think especially initially when you first get to space, people have a sensitivity to smells. I think it seemed to me to go away after a few weeks. Luckily, on board the space station, the ventilation system is pretty strong, and it cleans the system up very well, so the air doesn't really have much smell.
Can I chime in on that? The girls from Duchesne Academy created their experiment, and then they went to the launch. And that launch blew up. So aside from the shock, their reaction was, oh, now all those problems that we had that we didn't fix before this one, now we get a chance to do it. They did some improvements, and a remarkable turn of fate, the second time they launched it, it also blew up. Now, we don't have a lot of these happen. It's extremely rare, fortunately. But it happened twice for them, and both times they said, okay, now we get a chance to improve it. And I think it's very important. We also, when we're approving student experiments to get launched to the space station, we do not expect perfection. It's the wrong goal. The goal is for you to try it and learn. And who knows, maybe the equipment isn't right or you didn't do it right and you get a second chance to try it. It's so important.
Is there a certain kind of like clothing that you wear in space besides spacewalks?
Yeah, so on our everyday life, we would live in like khaki pants and just polo t-shirts. That's our normal thing, kind of our space uniform, which was pretty comfortable in space. But we don't have a washing machine in space, so we don't really get to wash our clothes. So we kind of cycle through clothes, and once you've worn it for a while during the day, then you wear it when you work out, and then you put it in the trash. And then we dispose of it on a cargo ship that's going away and that's going to burn up. So that, we get rid of it that way. And we don't litter in space, but we don't have to worry about it anymore. But it does mean we have to have more clothing on board. Some of the investigations are actually looking at how do you develop clothing that has fibers in it that resist bacterial growth, which keeps the smell from coming up. And so we tested some clothing that way, but we have to continue to do that in the future. Either improve the lifetime of the clothing so that we can reduce the total overall clothing, or figure out a way to wash it in space when water is an extremely valuable commodity.
It's a good research projects.
Absolutely.
I was just going to ask you, Mary and Dan, there's a lot of really interesting questions about food, material, et cetera. Can we bring some of these projects? You don't have to be in outer space to really answer these. So maybe one of the goals is here. How can we create these projects? What do you think?
Well, certainly this collaboration is very exciting and makes sense. And I have students who are very interested in space exploration, and they're looking for things that they can do. For example, one of my students found out that there are scientists who created Martian simulant soil. So we reached out to the scientists, and we're getting samples in for her to experiment with. So we welcome every opportunity to do research here, and I'm very excited for this collaboration. I know my students are as well.
Okay, how about down here in front?
So this goes for anyone on the panel, and I feel like a lot of times you guys are asked the same questions, and this is sort of an opportunity for a question that you aren't commonly asked, but you wish that people ask it more often.
That wasn't on the list.
Well, I think probably the one thing I get asked a lot about what it's like to be in space, but most of my job as an astronaut was on the ground. So, I was lucky enough to live 665 days in space, but I worked as an astronaut for 22 years. So most of the job is on the ground, and the part of the job that was most satisfying is actually being a part of a team. We helped train crews that were in training. If I had already flown in space, then I would help train a crew who was getting ready, who maybe didn't have a previous flight experience, or we would work in mission control and help crews that were on orbit, or we would go test procedures and say, hey, this isn't going to work in zero gravity because of X or Y. So we did a lot of things like that to ensure success for the crew that was on orbit or the next crew that was going up.
Let me just try to answer a very good question. And it was sort of posed earlier, so maybe it was asked, and that is, what can I do now to help my career in the future? I forget, one of the young women asked the question. That's a pretty important question. And I guess I would say, we're now in an epoch in not just space exploration, but that entire field is no longer a curiosity. Sure, there are curious pieces of it, but we're now at a place where it's going to start moving into an era where there'll be all sorts of opportunities, not just to explore, but to actually to utilize space as another domain, right? We see this in a very early way in the use of satellites for things that we all use every day, right? We all communicate globally. Some of those communications go through extraterrestrial satellites. Some of them go through ground links, some of them go through air links. But we're now broadening our perspective in a lot of technical areas that really is opening up our future. So if you were to sort of ask yourself, what can I do now to prepare for a future? I would say science, engineering, math, those are all good bets. Art, great bet, right? So just kind of follow your passion.
I have one other response to that really interesting question. You might ask, do we have enough time to save planet Earth? And we talked about astronauts have the sort of the overview effect. They fly around Earth. They see Earth as a beautiful, dynamic, integrated system, a thin atmosphere, all these things going on this little oasis in space. And yet they also see the degradation, the climate change, retreating glaciers, deforestation, growth of population. We don't have enough time for all of you to go to space, have the overview effect, and think of home planet Earth in new ways. The changes that are happening are so crucial and so immediate, we have to act now. And I think that's not something for you to say, what can you do in 20 years, in 10 years? It's what can you do now?
I was just going to add, as a scientist or a researcher, the best question I'd like to get is one that completely pushes you out of your comfort zone. So I was recently asked, as you heard, doing acoustics, I was asked, could I go out and explain to a tire manufacturing company how they can use sound to produce a better product? Well, first you laugh, right? But then you had to do a lot of homework saying, well, how could they use it?
Yeah.
Totally was not in my comfort zone. But I can say now I really appreciate tire manufacture, and I keep my pressure tuned to a pin.
Good.
But
Good.
push people out of their comfort zone, because that's where the innovation's going to be. When you really got to think, well, how would I do that? What would I do as a different approach? And we got one more question?
What inspired you to go to space?
What inspired me to go into space was when I was 9 years old and watched Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walk on the moon. But I think what inspired me to really make it not just a dream, but a goal in my life was when they selected the first female astronauts when I graduated from high school. So that was kind of my initial inspiration for why I wanted to become an astronaut.
Thank you. Now, what I'm going to ask the panel to do as we go into a conclusion here, I want to take away from each of the panelists that you're going to share with the audience to say, remember that day that we kicked off this partnership, and each one of you, give them a takeaway that they can help themselves or their children to remember this event based on this incredible experience that you're sharing today. So I'll let, Mary, do you want to start?
Sure. I would like to say to the students to keep thinking outside of the box and believing that anything is possible, as we have seen with our esteemed guest, Dr. Whitson. So just keep dreaming big. Big things will happen.
This is a launch. We're just starting. Often there's an event and everybody, you go away, but we're here in the long haul and you are as well. So this is launching a great, great voyage.
Yeah, I would come back to again to the students. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't do it. Don't ever let anybody tell you you can't, because you can. And set your aim high. Surround yourself with mentors, colleagues, and friends, and the sky's the limit. You're living in a great time.
And I would echo that. But I think it's important when you're pursuing your goals, ask, how can I bring all of these things together? Science, technology, engineering, art, and math. We're talking about space, but none of these things works in a vacuum, right? we achieve more when we bring all of these things together. And so I would encourage you to always be looking how to build partnerships between these fields and not just focus on one.
And I guess I would reiterate my challenge. Challenge yourself to do more than you think you can.
And I would say seeing is believing. So you can see role models, but also see yourself for what you're capable of. Seeing is believing is also about you. And I think with that, I want to thank my panel. Just really an awesome group of people to be with.
It's a pleasure.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pamela Hayes. I'm head of school here at Sacred Heart and also a very proud alumna of this school. Thank you to everyone who was with us on this incredible day. Dr. Peggy Whitson was our scientist in residence who inspired over 13,000 Sacred Heart students across the United States today. I'd like to take a moment to thank trustee and lower school parent Emily Bailey Berry for putting all of this together. Please come up to the podium, Emily. We want to thank you. Amazing that she did that for us. Thank you also to Nancy Greco for organizing the panel and helping to forge our relationship with NASA and IBM. Thank you so much. Thank you today to scientists in residence, Dr. Peggy Whitson, for today's out-of-the-world experience. You inspired all of our students, from the 3-year-olds to the seniors. Earlier this morning, I announced that you are joining our ranks as a distinguished alumna of the Sacred Heart, and I have a special gift to commemorate this honor. Please come forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And also to our distinguished panelists, could you please come forward and accept a token of our appreciation?
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
You don't have to do this. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So tonight, for people that want to be able to see it, the Hardy Observatory is open. Our astronomy teacher, Robert Morrow, is there to show our new equipment. Please join us every Thursday evening with our astronomy technician, Rick Bria, and you can go down the side road at the back of the athletic center to get to the observatory. So thank you, everyone, for coming and supporting education for women, young girls, and have a good evening.
But I would love your contact.